February 14, 2019. 11:47 p.m. The red and blue lights cut through the quiet suburban street like a wound ripped open in the dark. A police cruiser idled in front of a modest two-bedroom bungalow on Willow Creek Drive, its headlights illuminating a scatter of rose petals crushed into the concrete walkway. The air was cold, biting, but what lingered heavier was the smell, iron and wilted flowers, sweetness curdled into something unbearable. Inside the house, just beyond the threshold of the living room, a woman lay motionless on the floor, her Valentine's roses spilled beside her, their deep red petals no longer distinguishable from the blood soaking into the carpet. Her name was Lauren Hale. She was 28 years old. And just hours earlier, she had been smiling. If you're watching this story unfold right now, take a moment to breathe this in, because nothing about what you're about to hear is accidental. And if stories like this matter to you, stories that expose what love can hide, remember to stay engaged, because every comment, every like, every subscription helps bring these untold stories into the light. The call had come in as a welfare check. A neighbor reported shouting, followed by a sudden, chilling silence. When officers arrived, they expected a domestic dispute. What they found instead was the end of a Valentine's Day that began with roses, soft words, and the illusion of devotion. But the truth, the real truth, did not start at 11:47 p.m. It started months earlier, in moments that felt harmless at the time. Lauren Hale believed in love the way some people believe in fate. Not recklessly, not foolishly, but with a quiet certainty that if she gave enough of herself, love would meet her halfway. She worked as a pediatric nurse at a local clinic, the kind of job that drained you emotionally while demanding endless patience. Children trusted her easily. Parents relaxed when she entered a room. She carried warmth with her, the kind that made people feel seen without trying too hard. That's why, when she met Evan Brooks, it felt almost poetic. They met at a charity fundraiser in early summer, the kind of event Lauren rarely attended unless guilt nudged her into it. Evan was charming in an unforced way. He listened. He asked questions that went beyond surface-level curiosity. He laughed softly, not loudly, and when he spoke about his job in real estate, he framed it as ambition rather than conquest. To Lauren, he felt safe, familiar, intentional. Their relationship unfolded slowly, deliberately. No rushing. No fireworks that burned too fast. Evan sent good morning texts. He remembered details. Her favorite tea, the song she played when she couldn't sleep, the way she hated loud restaurants. And when he showed up with flowers for the first time, Lauren laughed and told him it was unnecessary. He told her he liked doing unnecessary things for the people he loved. That word, loved, slipped into conversations early. Lauren noticed it, but she didn't resist it. She wanted to believe that love could be simple, that it didn't always have to arrive with warning signs and scars. But if you're listening closely, you already know where this is going. And if you think you've noticed red flags in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this resonate because they mirror realities people are often afraid to talk about. By autumn, the cracks began to show, thin at first, like hairline fractures in glass. Evan didn't like Lauren's long hours. He framed his frustration as concern, saying he worried about her exhaustion, about her safety driving home late. When she spent time with friends, he asked questions that felt just slightly too detailed. Who was there? How long did she stay? Why didn't she answer immediately? Lauren explained it away. Just past relationships. Misunderstandings. She told herself that jealousy was just passion wearing an awkward disguise. What she didn't see, what she couldn't yet name, was control slowly tightening its grip. By December, arguments had replaced laughter. Evan oscillated between affection and withdrawal, generosity and silence. When Lauren confronted him about his moods, he apologized with intensity, promising change, promising growth. He cried once. That moment anchored her. People who cry, she believed, are capable of reflection. Valentine's Day was supposed to be a reset. Evan insisted on making it special. He booked dinner reservations weeks in advance. He sent Lauren a message that morning telling her to wear the red dress he loved. And when he showed up at her door that evening holding a bouquet of long-stemmed roses, Lauren felt a cautious hope bloom inside her chest. If you've ever been in a relationship where hope keeps you there longer than logic ever should, you understand why Lauren smiled that night. And if that sounds familiar, don't just listen, stay connected. Stories like this don't exist to entertain alone. They exist to warn. Dinner was quiet but polite. Evan held her hand across the table. He talked about future plans, travel, moving in together, starting fresh. Lauren listened, heart pounding, torn between excitement and an unnamed dread she couldn't fully articulate. When they returned to her house later that night, the roses went into a vase on the kitchen counter. Shoes were kicked off. Music played softly in the background. To anyone looking in from the outside, it would have seemed like a perfectly ordinary Valentine's Day winding down. But tension has a way of announcing itself. The argument started small. Something about a text message Lauren received from a coworker. Evan's tone shifted. His questions sharpened. Lauren defended herself, exhaustion finally breaking through her patience. Voices rose. Words landed harder than intended. And then something changed. Lauren stepped back. Evan didn't. What happened next would later be dissected in courtrooms, debated in whispers, analyzed by people searching for logic where emotion had already taken control. But in that moment, there was no analysis. Only fear. Only realization. The roses were knocked over first. And as Lauren stumbled backward, as the room filled with chaos instead of love, the truth became painfully clear. This Valentine's Day was never about romance. It was about possession. If you're still with me right now, don't look away. What comes next reveals the turning point, the moment where love crossed into something far darker. Stay engaged, and let me know in the comments if you believe Lauren could have escaped what was coming. Because when the police lights finally flooded Willow Creek Drive, when the roses lay crushed beneath their boots, the story was already over. Or so it seemed. When Lauren's back hit the wall, the sound was sharper than she expected, a dull thud that echoed louder in her mind than it did in the room. For a split second, everything froze, the music humming faintly from the speaker, the kitchen light flickering slightly, the vase lying on its side with water slowly spreading across the floor. Evan stood just a few feet away, breathing hard, his face unreadable in the low light, as though the man she thought she knew had stepped aside to make room for someone else. Lauren raised her hands instinctively, palms open, a universal gesture of peace that needed no explanation. She tried to steady her voice, reminding herself that this was still Evan, still the man who brought her roses, still the man who once held her hand and promised her safety. She told him they were both tired, that Valentine's Day pressure had gotten to them, that they could talk tomorrow when emotions weren't running so high. Her words were calm, careful, chosen with the precision of someone who had learned how fragile the moment had become. But Evan wasn't listening anymore. There is a moment in many violent stories that survivors later describe as the instant everything shifts, the point at which reason leaves the room entirely. For Lauren, it was the way Evan looked at her, not angry, not screaming, but eerily controlled, as though something inside him had settled into a decision. His voice dropped when he spoke again, quieter than before, almost intimate, and that frightened her more than shouting ever could have. He told her she didn't understand how much he had done for her, how much he had sacrificed, how much he loved her. Love, in that moment, felt like a threat. If you're listening to this and noticing how easily love turns into justification in stories like this, you're not alone. This is why conversations matter. Stay engaged, and if this resonates with you, don't hesitate to share your thoughts below. Someone reading them might recognize their own warning signs in Lauren's story. Lauren's mind raced backward through the months they'd spent together, replaying moments she had once brushed off. The times Evan insisted on driving her everywhere. The way he subtly discouraged her from seeing friends who didn't respect their relationship. The apologies that always came wrapped in grand gestures instead of real change. Each memory landed now with new weight, rearranging itself into a pattern she could no longer ignore. She edged sideways, closer to the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Evan could hear it. She told herself that if she could just get outside, just reach the neighbor's porch, this would all be over. She had no idea whether Evan would stop her, but instinct screamed that staying in that room was no longer an option. Evan noticed the movement. He asked where she thought she was going. Lauren didn't answer. She moved faster instead, adrenaline overriding fear, survival narrowing her focus to the front door and nothing else. But Evan closed the distance between them in seconds, grabbing her arm with a grip that made her gasp. His fingers dug into her skin, not enough to break it, but enough to remind her how much stronger he was. "Don't," he said, his voice shaking now, not with sadness, but with something closer to panic. Lauren pleaded. She told him she loved him, that this wasn't who he was, that they could fix this if he just let her go. Tears blurred her vision, but she held his gaze, hoping to reach whatever part of him was still capable of compassion. For a brief, devastating moment, it looked like it might work. Evan loosened his grip. His shoulders sagged. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair as though he, too, was overwhelmed by what was happening. Lauren took that moment to breathe, to believe, once again, that the worst had passed. That belief would cost her everything. The argument reignited faster than it had ended, fueled by accusations that spilled out unchecked. Evan accused Lauren of planning to leave him, of never loving him the way he loved her, of making him feel disposable. Each word landed like a blow, eroding her resolve, trapping her in a cycle she didn't know how to escape. And then he said something that chilled her. "If I can't have you," he said quietly, "no one will." Those words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They hung in the air between them, final and unmistakable. Lauren felt a cold clarity settle over her, the kind that strips away denial and leaves only truth behind. She realized then that this was no longer about an argument, or jealousy, or even love twisted beyond recognition. This was about control, absolute, irreversible control. What Lauren didn't know was that Evan had already crossed a line in his mind long before Valentine's Day arrived. The roses, the dinner, the promises, they weren't gestures of reconciliation. They were part of a farewell he had scripted in his head, one where he would decide how the story ended. If you're watching this unfold and feeling that knot in your stomach, that's because stories like this force us to confront how danger often wears the mask of devotion. Stay with me, and if you believe these stories should be told, support the channel so more people hear them. Neighbors later told police they heard raised voices around 11:30 p.m., followed by a loud crash. One woman across the street said she almost called 911 but hesitated, telling herself it was none of her business, that couples argue all the time. That hesitation would haunt her for years. Inside the house, time became distorted. Minutes stretched and collapsed, blending into a blur of fear and desperation. Lauren tried to reason. She tried to run. She tried to survive. But Evan's resolve had hardened into something terrifyingly calm. When it was over, when the room fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall, Evan stood alone amid the wreckage of a night that was supposed to celebrate love. The roses lay scattered across the floor, petals darkened, crushed beneath his shoes as he paced the room. He didn't call for help. Instead, he washed his hands. By the time police arrived, Evan was gone. Lauren's phone lay nearby, screen cracked, a message unsent, frozen in time, a final attempt to reach someone, anyone, before it was too late. That message would later become a haunting centerpiece of the investigation, a digital echo of fear preserved forever. And as officers secured the scene, as neighbors gathered outside whispering and crying, one question loomed over everything else. Where was Evan Brooks? If you've made it this far, stay with me. What happens next reveals how a carefully crafted image can unravel in the harsh light of investigation. Share your thoughts, keep the conversation going, and let's continue uncovering the truth together. By 12:26 a.m., the crime scene had transformed from a private tragedy into a public spectacle. Police tape stretched across Willow Creek Drive, fluttering faintly in the cold night air, while neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering fragments of shock and disbelief into the darkness. Red and blue lights pulsed rhythmically against the walls of nearby houses, illuminating faces frozen in confusion, guilt, and fear. Inside the bungalow, investigators moved carefully, documenting every detail, every overturned chair, every petal crushed into the carpet, knowing that each small detail carried the weight of a life violently interrupted. Lauren Hale was pronounced dead at the scene. The house told a story even before anyone spoke. The living room bore the marks of a struggle, scratches along the wall, a broken lamp, the faint smear of blood leading toward the hallway as though Lauren had tried to escape one final time. In the kitchen, the roses still sat in their vase on the counter, untouched, pristine, almost mocking in their beauty. It was a chilling contrast, one that hardened the resolve of the detectives tasked with piecing together Lauren's final hours. And then there was Evan Brooks. His car was gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. His social media activity stopped abruptly just after 11:50 p.m. It was as if he had dissolved into the night, leaving behind nothing but devastation and unanswered questions. If you're following this closely, this is where stories like this often shift, from heartbreak to pursuit. And if you believe these moments deserve attention, this is the point where staying engaged, sharing, and supporting the conversation truly matters. Detective Marianne Keller led the investigation. She had worked violent domestic cases for nearly 2 decades, long enough to recognize patterns that repeated themselves with devastating consistency. Flowers, apologies, escalation, control, violence. The details changed, but the structure rarely did. As officers canvassed the neighborhood, Keller focused on Lauren's phone. The cracked screen still glowed faintly when powered on, frozen on a partially typed message that had never been sent. It wasn't addressed to Evan. It was addressed to Lauren's sister. "If something happens to me..." The message stopped there. That unfinished sentence hung over the investigation like a scream trapped in digital amber. Keller felt her chest tighten as she read it, knowing instinctively that Lauren had understood the danger she was in, even if she hadn't fully believed it would end this way. Lauren's sister, Megan, arrived at the scene shortly after 1 a.m. Her cries cut through the quiet street, raw and unrestrained, as officers gently guided her away from the house she would never step into again. She told police that Lauren had confided in her weeks earlier about Evan's jealousy, his temper, his tendency to apologize without changing. Megan had urged her sister to leave. Lauren had promised she would, after Valentine's Day. That detail settled heavily on everyone who heard it. Meanwhile, Evan Brooks was already moving. Security cameras later showed his car pulling into a remote gas station nearly 40 minutes away from Willow Creek Drive. He paid in cash. He wore a hood pulled low over his face. He looked calm, methodical, a man executing a plan rather than fleeing a mistake. Detectives tracked his movements through toll records, license plate readers, and financial transactions. Each data point painted the same picture. Evan wasn't panicking. He wasn't spiraling. He was erasing himself. Inside the interrogation room at the station, detectives replayed recorded interviews with friends and co-workers. Evan was described as attentive, driven, intense. Some mentioned arguments, possessiveness, moments of discomfort they couldn't quite explain. Others insisted he adored Lauren, that he would never hurt her. Those words echoed bitterly against the evidence. If you've ever wondered how people miss warning signs, this is where the answer often lies, in the space between what someone shows the world and what they hide behind closed doors. Stay with the story. Talk about it. These patterns don't disappear unless they're confronted. By the 3rd day, pressure mounted publicly. Lauren's face appeared on news broadcasts, her smiling photo juxtaposed against headlines announcing a citywide search for her boyfriend. Vigils formed outside the bungalow. Candles flickered beneath handwritten notes demanding justice. Her co-workers from the clinic gathered in silence, grappling with grief that felt unreal and permanent. Then, late on the 4th night, a breakthrough. A hiker reported an abandoned car near a wooded area outside the county line. Inside, police found Evan's jacket, his wallet, and his phone, powered off and carefully placed on the passenger seat. It looked staged, intentional, like a final message. But Evan himself was nowhere to be found. Detective Keller stared at the evidence laid out before her, the weight of it pressing down hard. Some killers run because they're afraid. Others run because they believe they've won. She couldn't yet tell which category Evan fell into, but she knew one thing with certainty: this story wasn't over. Lauren's last Valentine's Day had ended in silence, but the truth was still moving, still breathing, still waiting to be uncovered. If you're still here, stay with me. What comes next forces a reckoning, not just with Evan's fate, but with how justice unfolds when love turns lethal. Share your thoughts, keep watching, and stay connected. The search for Evan Brooks did not end with sirens or a dramatic arrest. It ended quietly, the way many stories like this do, with a phone call just before dawn and a stretch of land most people never notice. 5 days after Valentine's night, a park ranger hiking a rarely used trail near the river basin reported something that didn't belong there. At the bottom of a shallow ravine, partially concealed by winter brush and damp leaves, lay a body. Identification came quickly. The jacket, the shoes, the face that news anchors had been repeating for days. Evan Brooks was dead. Authorities ruled it a suicide within hours, citing the absence of defensive wounds, the location, and a hastily written note found folded into the pocket of the jacket he had abandoned days earlier. The note did not confess. It did not apologize. It framed the night as a misunderstanding, a moment that got out of hand, a tragedy he claimed to have never intended. Even in death, Evan clung to control of the narrative, shaping his exit as carefully as he had planned the evening that destroyed everything. For Lauren Hale's family, the news brought no relief, only a hollow finality. There would be no trial, no courtroom confrontation, no moment where Lauren's voice, silenced on her living room floor, would be echoed through witness testimony and evidence. Justice, in its traditional sense, would never arrive. If you're still listening, still holding space for this story, this is where many people quietly turn away. But this is also where the truth matters most. Stay present. Stories like this are not just endings, they are mirrors. Lauren's funeral took place on a gray morning that felt too ordinary for the magnitude of loss it carried. The church overflowed with people whose lives she had touched in ways both small and profound. Parents from the clinic sat beside co-workers, neighbors, childhood friends, all bound together by disbelief that someone so gentle could be taken so violently. At the front of the room, a photograph of Lauren smiled back at them, her expression frozen in a time before love turned dangerous. Megan spoke briefly, her voice steady only because grief had exhausted her tears. She talked about Lauren's kindness, her stubborn hope, her belief that people could grow if given enough patience. She did not mention Evan by name. She did not need to. Everyone in the room understood who had stolen the future Lauren deserved. Outside the church, someone had placed a bouquet of red roses on the steps. Megan noticed them immediately. Her jaw tightened. She walked past them without slowing, leaving the flowers untouched. Later that day, they would be removed, discarded quietly, like an object no one wanted to claim. Detective Keller closed the case 2 weeks later, though the word closed felt dishonest. She filed reports, archived evidence, and wrote summaries that reduced a life into timelines and bullet points. Still, Lauren's unfinished text haunted her. Those 4 words, "If something happens to me," lingered like a whisper from the past, a warning that had come too late. In her final report, Keller included a note that rarely made it into official documentation. She wrote about patterns, about escalation disguised as devotion, about how often violence arrives wrapped in affection, apologies, and flowers. She knew most people would never read it, but she wrote it anyway, hoping that somewhere, someday, someone would recognize themselves in those lines and choose differently. If you've ever felt uneasy about someone's love, if you've ever ignored fear because hope felt louder, let this story stay with you. And if sharing stories like this matters to you, staying engaged, commenting, and supporting these conversations helps them reach the people who need them most. Months passed. The bungalow on Willow Creek Drive was sold. The carpet replaced. The walls repainted. New people moved in, unaware of the ghosts beneath their feet. But Lauren's absence lingered in quieter ways. An empty locker at the clinic. A birthday that came and went without celebration. A sister who still reached for her phone instinctively, only to remember there would never be another reply. Valentine's Day returned the following year, and with it, the familiar flood of roses, cards, and carefully curated love stories. For Megan, the holiday became something else entirely, a reminder not of romance, but of the cost of ignoring fear. She spent the day volunteering at a shelter, speaking softly to women who carried bruises beneath long sleeves and hope beneath exhaustion. She told them Lauren's story without names, without gore, without sensationalism. Just truth. Some listened. Some cried. One woman left that night and never went back. That mattered. Lauren Hale was not defined by the way she died. She was defined by the way she lived, by the love she gave freely, and by the warning her story now carries for those willing to hear it. Evan Brooks tried to control the ending, but he did not get the last word. The last word belongs to those who remember Lauren not as a victim, but as a lesson written in blood and roses. And if this story has stayed with you, if it has unsettled you or stirred something uncomfortable but necessary, don't let it end here. Talk about it. Share it. Let it be more than a tragedy retold in silence. Because sometimes, the most dangerous love stories are the ones that look beautiful from the outside.